Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you. And I want to remind everyone, as always, that this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes. That does not constitute working with a licensed mental health professional. Please seek one out in your area. And if there's not one in your immediate area, please look at who's available in your state. It does mean working via teleconference, but it means you're getting help to heal. And that's what's more important. So, you already heard just there, our guests for today. And so if you heard the podcast that came on previously with this individual, we talked about, we're talking today with Dr. Erin.
Dr.
I'm having
Erin
a tongue-tied moment.
That's all right.
Feeling. We're going to be talking about, this is actually gets to the actual first time I actually saw them, which was during the presentation known as TAGS, which is a Therapeutic Applied Gaming Summit. And yes, we're going to get into the geekdom here for those of you listening.
Right.
And they were doing a presentation on brain spotting in tabletop role-playing games. And if you have noticed, those of you who have been listening to my podcast for a while, I am a tabletop game role-playing geek in that area. You can also find me over on Symphony Entertainment as one of the cast playing on their role-playing games as well. So let me give you the bio on Dr. Dr. Findley, and then we can get into this. Erin Findley is a PsyD and is a licensed psychologist based in Napa, California, who leads her private practice with compassion and a commitment to making a difference in the lives of neurodiverse individuals, couples, artists, high performers, and those who are single incident, complex, and or developmental trauma. In her clinical practice, Dr. Findley uses a highly attuned, radically accepted bottom-up approach that is built on attachment theory and neuroscience. She is a certified brain spotting consultant and therapist who is an HSP or highly sensitive person, knowledgeable therapist. She has received advanced training in emotional focused therapy for couples and is also trained in both classic EMDR and attachment focused EMDR. Beyond her professional credentials, Dr. Findley is a champion for social justice and actively participates in ongoing learning, self-reflection, and advocacy efforts spanning more than a decade. Her commitment to decolonization, both professional and within her practice, reflects her dedication to equity and inclusive mental health services. This dedication extends to her professional efforts driven by a profound commitment to enhance the qualities of life for autistic and other neurodiverse individuals. She employs a multifaceted approach, educating both the general public, professionals across various disciplines, while striving to improve access to high-quality neurodiversity affirming services and support. Dr. Findley has also pioneered professional spaces where like-minded colleagues can learn her methods of incorporating neurodiverse affirmative principles into brain spotting, couples therapy, and psychological assessment. So welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
For this episode. So as I've said in the past, is like, how did you get here? And we can go to some different spaces, especially one that sort of shows your enjoyment of your geekdom, maybe.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to assume everybody who is listening now has listened to the previous podcast where I, gave some details. So I'm not going to recap those, but so in terms of my geekdom, it started early. I was, science fiction fantasy reader from day one, basically. And worked at the Renaissance Fair when I was in high school and college. And I've been a theater person and, opera stage performance, theater there. After my grad school for music, when I was in that phase of life where I was like deciding, do I want to try to be a professional opera singer or not? One of the things that I really dug into was D&D, Champions, um, and a couple of other gaming systems that I'm not remembering now, but D&D and the Champions were the two biggest ones.
Mm-hmm.
And they were so awesome. And it was so much fun. And I had this really killer group. Um, and it was, yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was going through my own sort of mental and emotional turmoil. And I was actually working through a number of my own um, mental health issues and identity issues, really, through the gaming process. And I didn't know that really until much later. And then once I got into grad school and for psychology, of course, they don't include gaming or anything like that
Mm-hmm.
in grad school curricula. Well, maybe they do now, but they didn't then. Um, but I've had many clients who have the geek angle of interest, and of course computer gaming also has become
Mm-hmm.
more of a thing. I'm like an exennial, so I'm on that cusp of Gen X and millennial, but I did grow up with computers, I think a little
Mm-hmm.
ahead of other people of my actual age. So I'm a little bit more millennial, which is ironic because my husband, who's a couple of years younger than me, is actually more of a Generation X person. It's kind of funny. Um, but anyways, so computer gaming is something that I was super into, and that's actually how I met my first husband. Um, and and then doing the D&D and D and the Champions, and
Mm-hmm.
then after grad school, I started to get clients who were super into gaming, and I started to think, is there a way to make use of this to help the person develop their identity, their interests, explore different aspects of themselves. What does it mean if you gravitate towards this kind of character or that kind of character? And it's not a prescriptive, oh, well, if you always gravitate towards being an elf, then you obviously wanted to be taller when you grew up. It's more
Oh.
like, what does it mean? What does it mean for that person, right? I wanted to be taller when I grew up. I'm 5'3" on a good day. Um,
Which is an interesting, and this is also an example of what has gotten screwed up because of our movies and so forth. Because if you look at the classic actual history and depiction of elves, yeah, they may be tall and thin, but they're usually still short. They weren't coming above
mhm.
them. Maybe you were lucky if you got a tall elf at about 5 foot, but they were tall. They would be tall and lanky within that framework.
Right. More of a relative statement than an absolute statement. But then we
Mm-hmm.
end up with
Mm-hmm.
like,
Oh,
Legolas,
yeah.
what's his name? I can't even remember who played it in the movies, but
Oh,
that guy.
Orlando Bloom. Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you. That guy.
and yeah, and then there's also the standpoint of which is then I think a lot of people forget. If we go back into history, anyone who is now like 6'1" would have been
Oh,
considered a
giant.
giant
It's a giant. Giant.
compared to anyone back in the past. People were much shorter then.
Yeah. I was born in the wrong era. I would have been average height probably 200 years ago.
But so then in that case, I got to ask, since you were talking about D&D, which edition are we talking about?
Um,
If you know.
oh God, it's been longer than I care to admit. I want to say fourth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which edition was most active around the 2000s.
That would probably been the end of the 3.5 going to 4.
Yeah, so I think we were using four.
Okay. Yeah. I got
Yeah,
introduced in 3.5 when I was actually able to play it versus just what I saw in all the media and so forth. And I do consider,
right.
even though I technically fit in the Gen X, I'm probably also that Gen X millennial set as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Yeah,
Um, but I think also bringing the aspect back to we're both brain spotters and brain
yeah,
spotting and tabletop. Now that was a
yeah.
connection that when I saw this pop up on the tags list of various ones, it's like, oh, I've got to watch that. And that's when I first saw you.
Yeah, that was a fun presentation, and the gentleman who volunteered to be the demo, he was great. He really dug in, and we got to some interesting places. If you're out there, Mr. Demo, whose name I'm not remembering right now, I hope that someday you contact me and tell me how you're doing, because I'd love to hear. Um, but yeah, so one of the things that we talk about in brain spotting is the idea of parts.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have various parts. This isn't like going all the way to dissociative identity disorder, or we used to be called multiple personality disorder. Like that's its whole own thing. And I'm not talking about that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we all have different aspects of ourselves. And sometimes, especially when we're sort of learning to get to know ourselves in a new or different way, it can be helpful to have an opportunity to embody those parts, which
Mm-hmm.
tabletop role-playing games are perfect for, because you're literally like, okay, this is who I am, right? So you create who you are, and then you bring that person into an interaction, and it gives you an opportunity to try it on, to
Mm-hmm.
see how it feels. And then over time, you have that opportunity to incorporate what feels good and what feels like you, and then discard whatever doesn't feel like you. Also, it gives you an opportunity to explore people who are very different than you. So some people who, play a gender of a character, as an
Mm-hmm.
example, who play a gender of a character that doesn't match their current gender identity. Some of those are exploring what would it be like to, embody that other gender identity, or a different gender
Mm-hmm.
identity than the one I'm currently identifying with. Others try out to be like, what is that person's perspective like? What would someone who has that gender identity um, feel or experience? And so there's a number of different ways. It could be height, it could be, character background. Like, what if you grew up in a financially stable environment? What would it be like to embody a character who never knew where the next meal was coming from? Right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to do that effectively in the tabletop role playing environment, you have to actually do some homework. And you have to actually dig into what the psychology of that person and that background might be like. And so you're exploring and you're creating. And so we can use brain spotting to expand that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do your listeners know what brain spotting is?
Well, I've had a number of other brain spotters on, but why don't we go ahead and again update them on the newest forms of it, which we're now calling much more neuroexperiential, even though brain spotting is probably
Yes.
going to be the shall we say common name for it.
Yes.
Don't kill me, David, please. Uh,
I doubt you will.
uh,
Um,
uh, yeah, I want to go there.
yeah. So the idea of brain spotting is fundamentally where you look affects how you feel. Um, and the neuroexperiential expansion is about, it isn't just how our eyes orient, it's about how our entire body orients. So if you're looking straight ahead, right, that's one orientation. If your eyes are going straight ahead and your head is tilted to the right,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually a different orientation, right? And so, like, our whole bodies orient. It's not just our eyes, it's not just our heads, it's our whole bodies. And so, um, you know, the more that we can get into our physiology, into our body experiences, the more that we can access these different parts of ourselves. And some of those parts are trauma capsules, right? But not
Mm-hmm.
all of them, right? Like, if you're role playing a differing character because you want to explore that experience and it's not something that you have any connection with, that's not a trauma capsule. That's a deepening of the physiology
Mm-hmm.
of of what that experience might be. Kind of like an actor who's really digging into a character. It's literally the same
Hmm.
process. And that's actually what inspired me to do the tags presentation, was thinking about gaming in the context of seeing and going to a training where the trainer, in this case it was David Grand, was working with an actor and using the brain spotting process to help that actor sink into the character and embody that character even more. And I
Hmm.
thought, there's got to be a way to work with this with gaming. That's cool.
Right.
So
Well, I think
that's where
this
this
is,
idea came from.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this also gets into one of the other elements that I think sometimes we don't get to have as much seen around brain spotting, is that place of where is it also being with the expansion, with the aspects of where it's showing up when the performance standpoint. I know
Hmm.
a lot of what David, and then we're talking about Dr. David Grand here, worth much of brain spotting came from working with athletes and in the sports
Yes.
environment and the performance environment. Sometimes I
Yes.
don't think we talk as much about that as we could, as opposed to all of the art trauma care that and good that brain spotting does there too.
Yeah, and also business performance. Like there's one of my clients that's coming to mind. Um, you know, really incredible business person with performance anxiety. So giving speeches was difficult. Getting up to talk to other C-suite people was difficult, and so like working through the performance aspect. And for
Mm-hmm.
this particular person, there happened to be some trauma roots, but for for other folks, sometimes it's just like, I am going to embody the fact that I can own this stage, that I belong here,
Mm-hmm.
right? How many of us could benefit from a little bit of that?
Mm-hmm. Very
Right?
much
We could
so.
all benefit from that.
Very
Um,
much so.
yeah, and so there's there are so many ways. Like brain spotting can be used to clear out blocks and resolve trauma, but it can also be used to grow into things. And that's one of the places that I was really having fun playing with the tags presentation and thinking about brain spotting in a gaming context. It's like, how do you help someone grow into their character to explore it even more? To make that character more vivid, more alive, more embodied, right? Um, and then, and then, as a therapist thinking about gaming, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does that tie into that person's identity development, right?
Mm.
Because that person then has a chance to experience and explore a side of themselves that maybe they've only just explored a little bit, or they haven't touched at all. Maybe it's been too scary to explore it themselves. And to be able to go into that with somebody who is compassionate and caring and affirming and supportive, and just creating all of this room for the person's nervous system to play,
Mm-hmm.
like that is a cool experience. Um, so yeah, I could go on for days, but I don't want
Oh
to.
no, that's part of providing the space for that to hear, because I think there is that standpoint to, and I know I kind of hit on this during our previous podcast, which was about how our field thinks and operates, and the idea not just of the embodiment, but even the relationship of what the importance of the ideas of play once we get past being kids and into adults, the
Mhm.
importance of what it means for the how escapism has been given a bad word or bad name,
Yeah.
as being that it is actually serving a purpose in our psychological development and psychological health.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, to me anyways, there's a difference between escapism that's disconnecting and escapism that's allowing a person to explore new areas without expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about, like when you're up late and you're like watching the next YouTube video and the next YouTube video and the next YouTube video and you're just doom scrolling, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's escapism. Yeah, absolutely. But it's a distraction. It's about sort of being like disconnecting from your experience. But this kind of escapism, you're turning your attention away from the realities that are, currently present and tuning your attention into an internal process, or you're tuning your attention into a specific characteristic that you want to explore.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same kind of experience that happens when people zoom in, when they get into sort of a tunnel vision kind of place when they're writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's flow. It's that flow state,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're writing, or if you're a painter and you're painting, or if you are a knitter who's doing some amazing knit creation that like I could never do because I'm not
Mm-hmm.
coordinated enough to knit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those those are all opportunities to go into a very narrow slice of experience and sort of let it expand and grow in this really cool exploratory way. That's very different than I'm just trying to disconnect from whatever is happening in my mind, body, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
soul,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Or
one's
dealing,
kind of a tuning in.
yeah, or dealing with the fact that my job's oppressive, my relationships falling apart. Uh, I just don't like the state of the world and such, which would get into
Yeah,
the part of the doom scrolling and so forth,
right.
or
Exactly.
even the subject of magical thinking. And
Hmm.
I think that's something that we need to go back and redefine about who and what is actually magical thinking. But
Hmm.
that I'm getting off my soapbox on that one.
No, actually, I want to hear your soapbox. What is it?
Well, I think the concepts about what are we applying for magical thinking have been things that have gotten used, sadly, as a way of saying, oh, just because somebody believes that the river has a spirit, has a consciousness,
Mm.
is
Hmm.
not is not destructive magical thinking, as opposed to believing that this person who was abusive to them is their one and only, and that they need to have this relationship, and it's clearly, as a tarot card saying, no, this guy's not coming back, honey, move on. But they're under this magical delusional thought that this is the person they're supposed to spend their entire life with. That's a
Yeah.
magical thinking that we need to start really looking at, not things like someone wants to believe in an elves. Okay, if it's believing in elves is helping them get through the day, that's not a problem.
Yeah, I think there's so much in our field, in the field of sort of Western psychology, that is so prescriptive about how people should think and how people should be and what it means to be an adult. And it's so formed by capitalism and ableism and
Mm-hmm.
racism and all the other isms, sexism, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of the other
Neurotypicalism.
neurotypicalism, you bet. Um, and and I have to hope that our world, our society is growing towards a more expansive understanding of what it means to be a whole person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to accept the person in front of you, to see, like if you want to do something with your life that I don't agree with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that isn't harming me, right? Who the hell am I to get in your way? Right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not harming other people, if you're harming yourself, and I have concern for you, by all means, right? Then I might say, hey, Perry, you're doing this thing, you're staying up, you know, 20 hours out of 24, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
really concerned about the effect that that's having on your body. And
Mm-hmm.
you are like, yeah, no, I know. And I've thought about that, and I've decided that it's worth it to me to do this because of whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not my like you're not crazy if you decide to do that. That and yeah, the lines are kind of gray, but there are
Mm-hmm.
a lot of really ways to be wonderful and healthy in this world. It's not just, you go to work in the morning at 9 o'clock, you get home at 5 o'clock, you cook,
Mm-hmm.
you have your casserole for dinner, your wife delivers it to the door in her pearls and, you know, 1950s dress and heels and wearing red lipstick because, red lipstick is welcoming, and all that crap, right? Like there's
Eh.
so many ways to be wonderful, functional, creative, amazing human beings.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that capitalism and all the other isms don't support that. And so I'm like my hope is that we are in the process of growing as a species
Mm-hmm.
towards a greater understanding and greater empathy and frankly less less need to be controlling of other people
Mm-hmm.
and more ability and willingness to be curious and explore,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so to circle all the way back
Right.
to the brain spotting parts, like this is actually one of the ways that we can do that is we can explore other people's perspectives through that parts experience, whether it comes from gaming or whether you read a story in a newspaper and you want to understand why, the person in that news story did the thing, whatever the thing was, like you can use brain spotting to understand that person more, to kind of maybe get into their experience a little bit more. And
Mm-hmm.
then that's going to impact you as a human. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and even when you're embodying a serial killer, I haven't had anybody do that, but I'm like one of the fundamental assumptions of both brain spotting and EMDR is that we are, as a species, like our on a nervous system level, we are wired for health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe this is true because when I cut my finger heals, right? And so if we're given the proper circumstances and the proper support, our minds and our bodies move towards health and wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when that happens, like even if I'm taking a time to explore and embody a serial killer, like my nervous system, the part that is actually me, is gonna know I don't want to be a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and actually, I'm gonna share something personal. So not that long ago, I processed a pocket of developmental trauma that held a lot of rage in it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in the midst of that processing, I wanted to have a certain person who actually is currently dead through no actions
Mm-hmm.
of mine, um, to burn, literally,
Mm-hmm.
like human candle. Like
Mm-hmm.
in the depths of that processing, that's what that trauma piece inside of me wanted, right? But
Mm-hmm.
once the processing was done, I didn't want that. And when I found out that the person had actually died already, like my normal empathy
Came
for
on.
that person who had hurt me
Mm-hmm.
came forward and was like, "Oh gosh, that sounds like it was a horrible death. I hope it wasn't as bad as even though this is a horrible person, I still hope it's not, it wasn't that bad because I wouldn't wish
Mm-hmm.
that on anybody." Right? So
Mm-hmm.
our normal um compassion comes through, our normal character comes through. So like, if you just have a really deep desire to explore a serial killer, okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have faith that whoever that person is who has that curiosity, that their fundamental character is gonna come through. I've seen it happen too many
Mm-hmm.
times. So
Mm-hmm. So I think
some
that's a lovely place
yeah.
for us to take a break. And
Okay.
we'll come back here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls and Tethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Erin Findley, psychologist, and brain spotter as well. So we'll be back shortly, folks.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Do you have knots? Not the physical tightness in your neck and back, and not the ones on a rope, but metaphors for the helpful and unhelpful tugs in life that can help us ascend to a new level or stop us from falling too far back down. Join host Perry Clark for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, a program about mental health and its practice from an Indigenous person of color. We'll help you find the knots that help you and avoid the ones that don't. Listen for new episodes every other week on the Voice America Empowerment Channel. Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Change your world. Change your life. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com. Have you become a member yet? Sign up now to become a member of Voice America. It's always free and easy. Plus, you get to take advantage of some great member benefits. Get unlimited access to millions of hours of on-demand content across all of our channels. Keep track of your favorite episodes, shows, and hosts in your own customizable library. Find out what shows you might be interested in based on your favorites. Plus, you get insider access with our newsletter. Membership gives you more. Sign up at voiceamerica.com and click register at the top right.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Erin Findley. And we're going to continue, although probably in some slightly different area, continuing to talk about brain spotting and some gaming. And also, let's talk a bit about neurodiversity as well. So going back to something you said earlier in our previous half, was talking about how brain spotting is working with holding space, business, and so forth. I know that, especially if we go on the Brain Spotting website, we can see some of the other specialty trainings out there, because I know there's one for things like working with money, working with addiction, and so forth. But the standpoint of where we're looking at brain spotting, not just purely from the idea of trauma, but from this standpoint of being able to expand and have the space in the world that is possible. So what's your experience with that?
So, we bring our whole selves into our business environments. We might emphasize certain aspects of ourselves and de-emphasize others, but we are, our whole selves in that environment. And having the having those things that get in our way when we're in our work environment, it can sometimes be, a thought process or a limiting belief, or it could be, struggles around power dynamics, or it could be communication issues. And all of these kind of fall more in the area of coaching rather than therapy. If you're going into trauma healing, then you're really more angling towards therapy. But if you're going towards sort of like basically the line is, if you're basically a healthy person and you're wanting to grow and expand, then that you're more looking for coaching. That's more of a a specific sort of step-by-step process to help you achieve
Mm-hmm.
a goal. But in whatever area you're wanting to work in, you're not talking about deep traumatic roots, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus therapy, where you might be digging into those deep traumatic roots. You probably will be if that performance anxiety was tied in with that experience in fifth grade where you were singing a solo and your voice cracked like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And that left you with huge amounts of stage fright moving forward, right? Like then that's going to be more of a therapy angle, especially if there's a lot of shame that goes with that.
Mm-hmm.
But for someone who's wanting to expand, um, there might be, you know, that's more of a coaching conversation. And so the question is like, are there blocks that we can identify that you can take concrete steps through, but also that if you could um, sort of melt into those blocks and sort of be with them for a little while, could they dissipate naturally on their own? Because one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that we know about the nervous system is that the nervous system gets bored. And so no feeling state lasts forever.
Mm-hmm.
Even some of them feel like they are going to last forever, but no
Mm-hmm.
feeling state actually lasts forever. And so even for people who have a tendency towards depression or a tendency towards anxiety, there are fluctuations, right? And so we're kind of take advantage of that with brain spotting, in the sense that if we can sort of pin down the specific aspects that we want to look at and then spend time with it, where we just let ourselves feel into it, and not just feel into it like, naming of emotions on that emotions wheel, but actually feel it in the body,
Mm-hmm.
um, then things start to shift because that physiology is allowed to complete its cycle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that happens, especially with anxiety, but not only with anxiety, is that people will start to sort of feel whatever it is they're feeling, and then they're like, "Oh, wait, that feels bad," and so they do something to cut it off,
Mm-hmm.
to try to stop themselves from feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what that does is that resets the loop. Instead of surfing a wave, now we're just in an endless loop of riding the escalator up and then taking the elevator back down to the bottom and going back to the beginning of the escalator. And
Mm-hmm.
so we just keep doing that loop. And so what brain spotting does is, through the support of your brain spotter, um, that we kind of pin down the thing that you want to work on,
Mm-hmm.
and then we make space for your nervous system to follow whatever path it needs to take to get up and over that hump so that it doesn't end up in that endless loop.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some of those loops are trauma loops, but some of those
Mm-hmm.
loops are not. Um, and some of those loops are much more about like, oh, that went badly for me, but it wasn't traumatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I gave a presentation and I was really sweaty and I was really embarrassed, and even though people said that I did great, and even though I felt kind of good about it, like my body was on overload, and it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, let's explore that block. And as long as we're not, going into those traumatic roots, then that
Mm-hmm.
stays in the coaching realm. Um, and so we can use this for all kinds of applications, business growth and personal improvement as an entrepreneur or as an employee. You can use it to sort of envision future um,
Mm-hmm.
targets. And again, this kind of goes back to where we were at the beginning with the gaming, right? If you're envisioning yourself as somebody who makes $1 million a year, just picking numbers out of my head. If you're really zooming into that embodiment and that vision of someone who makes $1 million a year, and you're taking some time on a brain spot to enhance that, then that's going to help your physiology tune into the opportunities that might let you move towards that goal. It's not magic, right? Let's not go into the magical thinking of, if I do a brain spotting session as a, feeling into being a millionaire, that I'm gonna, suddenly magically become a millionaire overnight, or that the chips will always fall in my direction. But it will mean that your brain is probably going to be more attuned to opportunities that could get you there. Right. And so that's another way, even though it's not gaming per se, you're still trying on a role, and you're still sort of experiencing it in your body in a way that you wouldn't otherwise, because you're using that brain spotting.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So how would we then extend this also to bring in the neurodiverse crowd, and especially keeping in mind the standpoint of what we're talking about with the nervous system? Because clearly that's not something that a lot of people are taught or recognize. And even the perception of time, going back into the aspect of no emotion, no experience lasts forever, yet our perception of it seems like it lasts forever.
Yeah, and for neurodivergent folks, the especially autistic people, we have what are often called special interests, which means that we have a specific area of focus, and we delve deeply into that area of focus. And we learn all the things about it, and we can often tell you all about it, and go on at length, which sometimes is, not necessarily the choice of our neurotypical companions in conversation, but it is actually a source of real joy for us. Like, if I'm with a neurodivergent or autistic friend, and they are info dumping to me about their favorite movie star, I'm not a big movie watcher, but I love the passion that gets activated in the other person when they're tapping into their special interest. So I just bask in it, and I sort of, yes, I take in the information, but more importantly, I just love being there with my friend who's like celebrating this thing that they totally love, and telling me all the things about it that they love, and also having, sometimes it sparks my own curiosity. And so that's a real way for us as autistic people, particularly, to share experiences and to bond. And so this can be a great vehicle with tabletop role-playing games, because that's a place where, first of all, many neurodivergent people gravitate anyways, but also the opportunity to sort of get immersed in this very deep, detailed world. I mean, and it also depends on your gaming group, right? Some gaming groups like to keep it super surfacey, and like, okay, well, I'm just gonna roll attack now, and it's like you're not acting it out, you're not feeling into it, right? But then others are like, all the way to LARPing, where you
Which is
are
live action role
fully,
playing.
yeah, I'm sorry, live action role playing, where you are fully embodied into the character, and you are being the character, and it's like live theater, right? So there's everything in between. So depending on what your gaming group is, as a neurodivergent person, you may find people that really dive in the way that that you do, and that promotes connection, that promotes attachment, like we were talking about in the previous episode, and that that also gives us a flow state, an opportunity for a flow state, which is very healing for the nervous system. And so then if you dovetail that with brain spotting, right? If you have a neurodivergent person who's got a beloved character in their tabletop role-playing game, and they want to sort of delve into that character even more, like that could be so healing just to sort of, it's like climbing into, I should say, I'm a water person. I love being in water. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this analogy may not work for people who don't love being in water, but I love being in water. So with that as context, it's like getting into the hot tub that's the perfect temperature, where you can just be in it and luxuriate in the warmth of the water around you and the movement of the water around you, and
Mm-hmm.
that perfect balance. Like for me, the perfect balance would be the warm hot tub on a crisp evening where it's
Mm-hmm.
dark out and I can see the stars, and there's just a little crisp breeze, and yet I'm feeling this warm toasty water just enveloping me and swirling around me. Like that is heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that for your mind, right, this is what brain spotting a beloved character can be like, especially for a neurodivergent person who's really poured a lot of their heart and soul into that character.
Beautiful.
So yeah, now I want to get in the
Now,
hot tub.
well, kind of have the weather for that coolness and the warmness in the water
Yeah,
for the
but it's
moment.
raining out, so
Yeah, yeah, that's the one drawback to
that's a
it.
bit of a downer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that that's probably also one of the interesting things is I don't know if there's many brain spotters out there who understand to think about that when working with a client, and especially a client that's neurodiverse. Because I think
Yeah.
again, there's so much that is thrown at us about deal with the trauma, as opposed to deal
Hmm.
with the joy.
Yes. Sensory joy is a thing. Glimmers are a thing. Like feel into the pleasure. You know, we are multifaceted individuals, and part of what happens when we get traumatized is we get stuck in
Mm-hmm.
sort of one angle, and we can't swing the pendulum internally between different states, right? And so the more that we can encourage folks to orient towards um, to have opportunities, I should say, to orient towards joy,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a whole thing that happens if a person is like too oriented towards joy. That becomes a kind of a bypass or a skip over
Mm-hmm.
the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that kind of scenario, focusing too much on the joy and too much on the happiness precludes reality awareness of
Mm-hmm.
like there are these other things. Um, but we are ideally, I think, pendulums where we swing back and forth. Some people's pendulum swings are slower. Some people's pendulum swings are faster. And the question is that pendulum swing the right one for that person? And the only person who can tell you that is the client,
And the
right?
right one for that particular moment too.
Right. Exactly.
But now, and as you talk about that, I'm suddenly thinking about the first Inside Out movie, which the new one's coming out soon, and how
Yeah.
much that, Joy was always bypassing everything.
Yes, she was. Oh, yes, she
Mm-hmm.
was.
Mm-hmm. Until she had to let the pendulum swing in the direction of sadness.
Right. And at the very end, you had that ball that
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't just the happy version of the memory. It
Mm-hmm.
was the blended, accurate version of the memory that had some happy in it and some sad in it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's reality, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
not um we don't live in a magical fairyland, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we live in a reality and that has beautiful aspects and really hard aspects and everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the more that we can make peace with what is while moving towards what we want, right? Because I'm not talking about, sit back and just, okay, well, the world is what it is, right? I do think we all have a responsibility to the best of our abilities to try to create a better world,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we have to start from where we're actually at.
Mhm.
And if you're constantly bypassing into joy or into spirituality is another really common bypass. Or if you're constantly, if your nervous system is stuck in towards depression, and there's probably a mental health reason for that, then, either one of those things is, it's not an accurate view of the world. There's
Mhm.
a musical term that's coming to mind right now. I'm just going to share it with you. It's chiaroscuro. It's Italian, and it means light dark,
Mhm.
right? And it's like it's the blend, it's the whole, it's the complexity of all the things, right? Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that's
W-
what we need to aim for.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's also, and the other thought that's coming to mind is, I think that also something that we as a profession need to think about in our caseloads, because of
Yeah,
the issue we are also having in our profession with vicarious
burnout.
trauma and
Yeah,
burnout.
yep.
How much are we also
Yeah,
having our clients that are coming in here about the joy, not just the trauma, the difficulties of life?
yeah. I can't tell you how many couples particularly that I've spent time with where I'm like, okay, so this is a week that actually things went really well. Let's have a celebration session. Let's
Mm-hmm.
actually unpack why it worked and really just feel how much awesomeness there is in the fact that this set of interactions worked so well. And my couples
Mm-hmm.
often, the first time I say that, they look at me like I've grown a third head. And they're like, "Well, but wait, I'm in therapy. We're not supposed to do that in therapy. What the heck?" And it's like, "No, therapy is about the whole person. Yes, we do focus on the pain and the difficulty and all of that, but therapy is about more than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Therapy is about helping you as the client become fully integrated with all of your parts. And integration doesn't mean that it turns into, like just a plain old blended soup, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be a really incredible, complex, stew or a salad, right? But some sort of way where there's all the things that are connected, and that you have the maximum internal resources available to you at any moment, right? To me,
Mm-hmm.
that's good therapy.
And I think that's a good place for us to go and wrap with the idea of good therapy, not just for ourselves, but for our clients, and how we can
Yes.
blend in brain spotting as well as our love of gaming as well.
Heck yeah. Because we're supposed to have fun too, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
after this, I'm gonna go keep working on my Tower of Titans for my Shop Titans account.
Very nice. Because I know, I think come next week, I've got a stream that even though it's all horror gaming, I got a stream that we'll be doing this next week. So got to finish prepping for
Nice.
that.
Nice.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, where can folks find you if they wanted to talk more about brain spotting, neurodiversity, even tabletop role playing if they want to improve their game?
Well, so the best way to reach me is through my website. My website is erinfindley.com, ERIN, F as in Frank, INDLEY.com. And and let's see, I don't have room for individual clients right now or couples clients
Mm-hmm.
right now, but I do have a couple of spaces for some consultations. So if there are therapists out there who want to consult on any of these topics, I'm happy to do that. And right now, depending on when you're listening to this, my website is
Mm-hmm.
under a little bit of construction, but my contact page is functional. So people can send me a message through that, and my assistant Melissa, who's amazing, will get that message, and then we'll figure out how I can help from there.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. And this is Dr. Erin Findley. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage family therapist. And this is Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. So have fun out there, folks, with your gaming.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.